Mm.
Welcome everyone to the Finding Yourself Masterclass. My name is Clarissa Finley and I'm your host, and I'm so excited to have Sarah Jane Burrell with us today. And I will let her introduce her amazing self.
Well, hi, it's so wonderful to be here with you, Clarissa, and I love what you're creating in this container of just allowing people to come back to themselves, find out who they really are inside. It's been a lifelong journey of mine, and why I got into this work, I suppose, of helping other people heal from unresolved trauma, especially from childhood, because I was there. I was always felt like there was something missing from my life growing up. I much preferred the company of animals to people because they're just so beautifully gracious in the way that they hold space for us. And I didn't really realize that I had this ability to read people until I let go of all the places where I had been creating trauma and drama and emergency in my own life. So I suppose we teach what we most need to learn, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about your journey of finding yourself and discovering what you wanted to do with your life.
Mm, um, wow. Yeah, it's a lot to cram into a little bit of time. But you know what? I think for me, it's always interesting. We were talking before we got online. Um, about why I live in South Africa and how I ended up being born an African.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always been part of that very interesting place for me to look at and explore why I was born into a country. I was actually born in Zimbabwe, which was in the midst of a very brutal bush war during my earlier years, and I've always seemed to gravitate towards some kind of war, whether it's an external one or an internal one, um, in my life. And I wasn't always in the business of trauma and helping people and animals sort of return to this place of trust. It was a winding road of making mistakes and screwing up badly and making not very good choices until um, I sort of went through my life being a people pleaser, being an overachiever, all the things that I'm sure many of you can relate to in life, because I just didn't feel like I was enough. That thing of, if I just achieve enough, then I'll be loved. And uh, so that's kind of what I did, was dim myself down, shut down my intuitive capacities, and just try to fit as best I could. But of course I didn't, because I found girls particularly unkind. Because I was such an overachiever. I was good at everything. I was an A grade student. I was the youngest person to ever represent my country at synchronized swimming, and it created a lot of separation. And I remember saying to my mother, in one of my tearful moments of, why are these girls being so mean to me, and why don't the boys like me? And it was always, oh, because they're threatened by you, or they're jealous of you. And that wasn't very helpful,
Yeah.
growing up, to have that, because as your conversation is all about, it's just like, I think it's part of our mammalian animal body that we need to belong. We need to have eyes on us in order to grow us, and remember that we're actually cyclic beings that are here to create life, our life's work, not in a season. That it's not all done at once. And yeah, it's just been a really interesting journey in what I've created up until now. I had a huge breakdown at 37. I had a multi-million-dollar furniture business, and I looked successful from the outside, and I had the perfect life,
Mm-hmm.
and the perfect marriage, and the perfect business. But inside, I was really, really slowly dying inside, and got to that point of feeling so trapped in my mind, in the story of my mind, that I thought the only way to get out of my current life, which wasn't working anymore, was to commit suicide, which I tried to do, and survived. And that really was the turning point for me to really start to take to take back control of my life and start to look at some of the choices that I'd made that were like just exacerbating this internal war with myself. So I told you it was a long story, but
Wow,
a little bit of it, you know, and there were brain tumors and all sorts of other health crises along the way. So it was just like, I'm not dying today, but I had to sort of get to that point of, I think, completely befriending death on not just a physical level, but on a metaphoric level, to really breathe life back into some kind of harmony and alignment that wasn't living in a war zone.
Wow. Sometimes it takes those total next near breakdowns for us to wake up, you know? So after you had that experience, then how did you build yourself back up after that?
Really, really slowly. You know, and I would be lying if I said that I was over it or through it or anywhere closer to become whole in myself, because I think it's a lifelong journey where we're all looking for a way to give and a way to heal our brokenness. That's always becoming visible as we sort of shed the old skins of what we think we have to be. So it's been a moment by moment journey of remembering, I think, of what it means to live in trust. You know, trust of our bodies. There go my howdy does, the birds outside. They always kind of do that when I hit a note, you know. It's like, okay, speak to more of that. Yeah, and I think also that was the biggest part for me, was realizing, and the animals taught me that. You know, the horses taught me that when I was sort of voluntarily hiding in a mental hospital. There were some horses that were down the track from this place, and I used to just spend hours with the horses, because I think that they are so good at mirroring back. Not only that is their heart space 600 times bigger than ours, but they really are such incredible mirrors, being that flight prey animal part of our own internal animal body, to really be able to sort of sit in those places of self-harm and the lies and the limitations that I was telling myself, and to start being more compassionate to the parts I didn't love, which is why my work is so deeply rooted in nature and in the animals, in that whole beautiful space of remembering that we are part of nature. You know, it's we're not separate from that, and I think that's really what your summit drew me to, was that sort of witnessing the transition of leaving a life of that I built my whole identity on behind, and not quite being in the next space of my own personal, where we have to sort of look at that old identity and the old story as the death of it, so that we can form a new space of belonging. Because there's always those moments, aren't there, when we're tempted to slip back into those old skins. And I think that for me, that's the part of what I call sitting in the waiting room, you know, whether it's a grief that's too big to grieve alone, or that recovery from an illness where, you know, I was basically told, go home and prepare yourself for death. We're always sort of stepping up to that new level of self. That's pretty tough to acclimate to, isn't it? You know, I think that's where we need, as I said, I think the importance of my journey was finding tribe, finding others to have eyes on me, not from a place of needing to fix, but to just witness the unraveling of it all, and just being holding that container, which is why I think containers like you're creating is so important, because we can never wholly unbecome it, can we?
No, and it's not really about unbecoming it. It's about just accepting all of it and then building on that from there. And you're so right. Having space to be seen and heard and grow in is so is so important.
Mm, yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. So, can you offer any suggestions on how you go about that? How you go about accepting, and because that's what our conversation here is really about. Is the Brene Brown quote of true belonging doesn't require you to change who you are; it requires you to be who you are. So, owning your story and your path and everywhere that you've come from, and then being able to make a choice of where you want to go from there. How do you suggest people go about that?
Oh, I think for me, it's always if it's not simple, it's not the trust process, which I teach. And that's really is about not looking, when we look in the mirror, we're not looking at ourselves. It's more like we're looking for ourselves.
Mm.
And I think that the body is the place that we never leave. So the simplicity of it is that we need to listen. A lot of times people say, listen to your body. But I like to think of it as listening to the world through our bodies, because trauma is never in the experience. It's in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we find our center when our center finds us. So just to be able to sort of push pause on the world and sit in that inner stillness, regardless of what's going on around you, just to be able to quieten yourself and really root into the earth and remember that connection to nature is probably one of the simplest things that we can do, and probably why so many people don't do it, because it's free, it's forgiving, it's generous, it never goes away. And so often if we just look toward nature and we look toward the season that nature is in, we will often find that sense of ourself in the nature of everything reflecting back to us.
Mm.
So I would just say, that we need to get out of our heads and into our bodies again, and viscerally do that. So movement, I think we forget how to play. And I think that's part of what I call this great separation sickness, is that we have imagined ourselves to be separate. And in doing so, in the stories that we tell, we create more isolation and more separation. So, why not look back to nature, which is so reciprocal in its giving, and teaches us how to trust, where we're out of congruence with our own true nature. I know in America you're having huge wildfires at the moment, and we've been going through seasons of drought in Africa. And I often get really curious about that, looking at where am I in a drought myself? Where have I dammed up, or where have the rivers dried up within my essence? Or what is the nature teaching us about the regeneration and the qualities and the aspects of using fire to cut back the dead wood and plant new seeds and tend to our own internal gardens. So I think the importance of it all is that we don't need to complicate anything. I think we're all looking for like a one size fits all, or a quick dose of medicine that's going to make us feel better.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not sustainable if we're not tending to our own self, what I call our own internal climate. Kind of, for me, it's kind of like a reflection of, the state of affairs that the world is in. Nature is always great at marketing herself. She never lies. She knows how to balance herself, but we're kind of like this virus, because we're in our mind so much, of untipping that balance. And I think we're really being asked right now to tap back into that sensitivity that is a felt sense. We have to feel in order to heal. So if we're kind of looking for the quick fix, and technology and everything's made us even more separate, hasn't it?
Yeah.
If we're going to rebuild a world that we want to see thrive and that's sustainable, not just for us, but for all life, I think we really have to start to build that trust with ourselves first, with respect and reverence and permission and love and appreciation and all those great things. And I think that's what I love about Brene Brown's work with vulnerability, you know, and the fact that courage comes from the Latin word cur, which means of the heart. And yet we close our hearts because we think that we can't survive pain, rather than seeing pain as this beautiful doorway to fully experience being present in the moment, you know, moment by moment thing.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, the way that you are tying in nature. I've thought of other human beings as being mirrors to us, but that's a really interesting concept of viewing what's happening in nature, what's happening around us, as also being a mirror as to what's happening in society. And I think you're right. I think that the earth is showing us the breakdowns that we are having as a global society, and that we're being given an opportunity to wake up and look inside and kind of come back to ourselves and find that peace and our, own intuition, and settle into that. I love that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the beauty of Chinese medicine, and it's one of my sort of go-to modalities as far as training, because it is exactly that. It's that that nature deficit disorder that you're speaking of, that nature is really showing us where we're so out of alignment with being part of nature, where we've taken dominion and ownership over the earth and the animals. And it's not comfortable work, is it? Because we then have to look at the choices that we're making, that we're contributing to the state of the oceans and global warming, and what our footprint is creating as part of the whole. And I think that's where part of that true belonging that you speak of is to know that we are of the earth. We come from the earth and we return to the earth. And that whole rebirth and death cycle needs to be honored. In the old days, we used to go with the seasons before when we were nomadic. And I think that's where women are really feeling that loneliness of belonging, is that we used to travel with the seasons and with the animals, and we ate seasonally, and we would sit around fires, and we would tell the stories of the harvest. And, we have those equinoxes to remind us to slow down and integrate and give blessings and appreciation for where we find ourselves in the seasons. And we've lost our way, in our sort of domestication of being rooted in one place. I think that's one of the things that women feel the most, because we have this incredible capacity as co-creators with nature. We know how to bear children. We know how to hold womb space. And we've lost the red tent. We've lost the tribe. And I think that's what matters to me, is, to follow our own truth and to express what motivates and moves us to what we really care about. We have to make it bigger than us. And it's not I think the Me Too movement was great in showing the imbalance of the sort of patriarchal ways. But I'm into we too. We need each other. We need eyes on us. We need community. We need to celebrate each other's gifts, because this is bigger than all of us. And we're not going to be able to change anything until we get back to the land and back to the cycle of nature, that our very menstrual cycle reminds us of that, that there's a time and a season for everything. Some things can't be rushed.
Yeah. I love that. A We Too movement. I love that. You know, I think it's both. I think it's coming into ourselves and grounding into who we are, and then when we find that, then the ability to look out and
Exactly.
incorporate that community and find that we can really belong anywhere because we're all in this great thing together.
It's beautiful, you know. I think it's scary because there's no map for us.
Mm-hmm.
But you're so right. You know, I think we if we can tap into our own inner story, the one that comes from the heart, the one that knows that we came in knowing, and then we lose parts and fragment out because of all the things that are programmed and put on top of us. And it does require us staying in that waiting room and doing our own grieving and giving grief a sound, and singing to joy, and using our voices and our throats for ourselves first, to connect with the others, you know. So yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. So as we go through the world, and I love bringing the nature in and grounding in, how do we find, you know, I talk to so many women who are looking for what they want to contribute in the world, like what is really going to make them excited. And it's a struggle. Sometimes I had my own struggle finding it, and it's like, seems like it should be easier to pull out of us. But what do you suggest for women that are kind of searching for how they want to contribute in the world? What's a process they can go through?
I appreciate that you asked that question, because I think, again, it's just that remembering too, that there is not one process that's going to get us anywhere. And to remember, I think that's the remembrance part, is to know that we're walking a spiral path where we are the ancestors of future generations that haven't been born yet, but we also have this wisdom in the stories from our ancestors to sort of show us the way. And I think that's where women are, my insight, that women are very different to what Joseph Campbell talks about in the hero's journey of having to, you know, go into the wilderness to find yourself. I think that for women, it's the process of tapping back into the wildness that's in us, because we've been told to be afraid of that for so long. And rightly so. You know, women have been persecuted and burnt at the stake for being witches, and now we're called bitches because, you know, we're standing in our truth. And there's still a lot of shame, I think, that's lurking underneath there in that sort of ancestral and collective trauma. So as much as I would say I have a lot of process in my toolbox, I think for me, the greatest contribution that I could make in this moment is to maybe look at where you have fragmented off from knowing that your path is going to change according to the climate that you're in and the environment that you're in. And that just showing up, it happens in the small moments, those sort of like those 1 degree shifts of the things that we perhaps don't push pause on and actually appreciate, and stop looking for the big leap or the big change or the big shift, but to really to have celebration for the fact that, gosh, I got my daughter to her extramural activities on time, and I slow cooked beautiful tomatoes that I picked off the vine from the garden. I think it's appreciating those small things that we sometimes deem as insignificant, that actually give us meaning in life, because I think that's what we all want. We all want better, don't we? We want better for ourselves. We want better for the collective. We want better for the earth. And I think it's so so easy to get completely shut down and overwhelmed by the enormity of the tasks that we have to do individually and also collectively to right the wrongs without making it hysterical. I think sometimes it's just about being able to be the joke of our own reality, laugh at ourselves, not take ourselves so seriously. And also just to remember that we're not one thing. We're everything in a minute by minute experience. And life is moving along so fast, isn't it? Time goes so quickly. Yeah. And even though we say it's a construct, we're still measuring our lives by a calendar and a clock, and it's tough to stay centered in the things that matter to you when there's so much chaos and so much noise going on around us. So I'm not sure if that feels complete for you as far as process, but I
love that. I love that. I feel like I had a similar feeling about it for a long time, just feeling overwhelmed with, I need to make this huge difference in the world. And I do want to do that, but like you said, it really does come back down to the ways that you are influencing the people right around you, and the little tiny things that you're doing in your day that bring you joy and fulfillment, and the closeness of it.
Yeah. And I think that's such a big part, because like you said, we get ahead of ourselves, or either we're so far in the future that we've created every extraneous what if possibility from the worst case scenario, so we don't make any choices, or we're living from the past and all the archives of all the reasons and justifications why we think we can't be more or give more or be more. And I think that's part of the illusion is when we think that we have to live a life without pain, instead of the whole of us being part of the creation that requires those moments of attachments and identity where we're challenged by life, then that whole perfectionistic thing comes up and stops us, when we're getting carried away with ourselves. So that to me is the trappings of living in the mind, where we sort of imagine our lives to be something that it isn't, that they aren't. I think that's when anxiety and depression and disappointment come up. And I certainly was there before I started to live this way, where we think that life isn't fair, or that we can't trust in life and we can't trust in other people, because we've imagined the story that something has gone wrong or will, in the illusion of that dream that it's not supposed to happen that way. But when we can become aware of the pain experience and sit with that, nurture the part of us that's stuck in the pain, and oftentimes that's at an age where you decided that it wasn't safe to be sensitive, or it wasn't safe to speak up, normally pre-7-year-old. And then later on in life, that part of us that doesn't align with the person that we're being now, and the imagined idea of who we're told we're supposed to be, that's when it gets all funky. And that's when the desperation takes us out of standing in our truth, so to speak. So, I think that's the suffering of not living fully into who we are, is that suffering is trying to make the self not yourself. It's saying, I'm not enough yet. Instead of trusting that I am enough.
Yeah. And being really present in the moment and feeling the feelings that come up, and acknowledging and recognizing and sitting with it, sitting with the pain, like you say, and letting it pass through you. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's the part of the story, is that when we decide to change our story or edit our Akashic record, the same thing. And when we decide to be the authority of our own life, regardless of what anyone else thinks or has to say about what you're choosing. Our story always insists that our thinking happens exclusively in our heads. And that's just the ego. You know, that's when we get so stuck in our cranium that we can't connect the head with the heart brain or the stomach brain. You know, the pelvic brain is where women have lived for generations until we were told that it was not a good place to live. But if we can put our ear to sort of all those imaginary places that separate us from listening to the world through our body, nothing changes. You know, if the body's not outside, the body is us. It's part of our physical being. It's how we experience life, and that's where we're missing the experience of our own being. You know, if you're divided from your body, does it make sense that you're also divided from the body of the world? So then it appears to be other than you or separate from you. And I think, again, that's the simplicity of the work, is going into this space of deep inquiry where you can trust yourself to know that you have what you need. You just can't see it. That's why it's called shadow work. But if you trust that your shadows or those places of challenge or difficulty or not belonging or moments of exile, you know, in that heroine's journey of being exiled from the red tent, from other women, is different to what, you know, going out into the wilderness. I think for a woman, the pain is in the exile from each other.
Yeah, we want to be close. We want to have community. We want to be together and nourish and nurture and grow. And yeah, for sure.
And I think, and that's the power of parable, isn't it? That's the power of storytelling from a place of learning, of evolution, of growing ourselves up and growing each other up, is being able to be fierce, to be the alpha bitch. You know, that word has been so convoluted. But if you look at any sort of pack animal like the wolves or the horses, so that's your predator and your prey aspect, we're all of it. You just have to read How Women That Run with Wolves to get that. And I do a lot of work with lions, and for me it's that same belonging is what lions have taught me, is that they rely on teamwork. They rely on each other. The older lionesses teach the young ones who have the speed to take down dinner tonight how to take down dinner, because they have the weight and the experience of the hunt. And it's a win-win for everybody. And again, I think that we've become so afraid of celebrating each other's light as women. That is part of the loneliness. That's part of the exile. Is you know, I dream of a world which is happening because we're dreaming it into being. That there is enough light in all of us to celebrate that, and when we do that, it makes us all stronger, and it makes us all more aligned with our sensibility in who we are. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, you know, our ability to feel the light within us and then shine it out and see the light in those around us, and as a whole fill the world up with more light. Well, this has been a beautiful conversation. I just have loved it. Is there anything as we finish up that you would like to share?
Just thank you for holding this space for women to come together and to trust that they're enough. You know, I always say, trust that you're enough for your body, you're enough for your family. You are enough. And to believe doesn't need to prove anything. nothing to hide, nothing to prove is a beautiful formula for living life. It's just like tap into that wild one and tap into that fierceness within you, and just give of your love and your time and your funds and your idealism. You get bigger than you. You get up in the morning. That was one of the things that I learned very early on, is you have to make it bigger than just the I am. On the days that you're not enough, when you feel like you're not enough to get up, then the shifts seem to happen a lot quicker. So I just say, celebrate those 1 degree shifts and reach out and touch somebody that needs to hear that.
That's beautiful. Well, where can our viewers find you, and what's up next for you?
Oh, thank you for asking. So if you're wanting to get in touch with me or know more about my work with the trust process, which I think is the foundation of everything, people can go to sarahjanefarrell.com or accessyourtruenature.com. I have 2 sites. The one is for animals and the one is for people. And I think animals are such great teachers at showing us to be kind people. So my work is very interconnected, and I'll just be doing more work out in the herd with horses. And I have an online trust process that's now you can learn online. And I have a beautiful safari coming up in September. So if you're interested in journeying home to Mother Africa and communing with animals and nature, come join me on safari. And you'll find all of that over on my site. Yeah.
Wonderful. I'll make sure to post that below. That sounds amazing. The work that you do is so unique and so interesting and so wonderful with nature and bringing the animals and everything in. So I really have loved hearing your perspective and the work that you're doing and everything that you've shared. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Namaste.
Thank you.
Bye.